Hello, everybody, and welcome to the season 3 premiere of Your Bish Therapist Podcast. Yay! That lovely, amazing voice you hear in the background is my dear friend, who I wouldn't want to have anybody else doing this with me for my very first episode. Please welcome her back, friend of the show, Mandy Slutsker.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, especially for your season 3 premiere.
Me too, girl. I was like, when I thought about what to do, I just, you and I had been talking about a couple of things, and I'm just so grateful that this all fell right into place. People love us together. I think that they love you just have a way about you that my listeners really love and appreciate. And so today, what we are going to talk about, we're going to do a little 50-50 split here. We're going to do the first part. We're going to talk about Real Housewives of Orange County, because at this point, last night, episode 5 aired, and it was a doozy.
It was something.
So I know Mandy and I both have a lot to say about that, especially as a former addictions therapist. I'm like, I could write a dissertation on this episode.
Yeah.
And after that, Mandy and I are going to, for those of you who don't know, we did an episode called Bracing for 2024 and talking about how to manage during, some tumultuous election cycles. And my goodness, Mandy, since we did that, have things changed?
There's so much happening.
So much happening. So Mandy and I felt it would be pertinent to do the second half of this podcast as sort of a Bracing for 2024 part 2, where Mandy is going to share her very amazing knowledge of, some of the backgrounds of all of this. We're going to talk about it from a place of, respect and how to maintain human rights and dignity and all that. So without further ado, Mandy, let's get into it. Let's talk OC.
I'm ready.
So, last night, just to recap, we basically watch Alexis, let me see if I can summarize this. So Alexis is acting like a petulant teenager who's just like so happy to have her 15 minutes of fame, which is kind of ruining things for me. How do you feel about Alexis being back?
So I was really excited to have her back because I wanted to know more about her personal story. And I know she has a child that's trans, and her journey with that and her faith and everything. And I think because she's a friend of and not a housewife, we don't really get her unless it's in group scenes. And all of the group scenes seem to be geared at upsetting Shannon. And so it hasn't been as enjoyable to watch her because we're not really seeing her. We're seeing what John Jansen wants her to be.
Boom. I couldn't agree more. And I'm so resentful of the fact that this woman has brought John Jansen back into our lives.
I know.
I am beyond resentful of that because I understand that there are, 3 sides to every story. There's a person A, person B's perspective, and then somewhere in the middle is the truth. But I don't care what Alexis is saying. The more you try to sell this man to me, the more I am not buying it, because haven't we heard this before from her, by the way, when she was with Jim Bellino, who was, her ride or die, amazing. And then they break up and then she's like, oh yeah, it was, she spilled a lot of tea about
it was
how
hell
that
being married to them.
Thank you. So pardon me if I just don't buy what you're selling. But you're right, is that Alexis does have a very interesting life especially in terms of what you said with her trans son and things like that. And so those are storylines I would actually love to hear, but we don't get to hear them because she's too busy trying to make herself relevant, I think. And it's just not a good look.
Probably as a very thoughtful and kind mother trying to protect her child the same way that Heather and Terry Dubrow have, and not showing too much of the child on TV so that people can criticize and comment. They are minors. So.
Oh, of course. And listen, not that I think they should even be featured on TV, but I would love to hear her story, because anytime someone talks about, their journey with that, I just think it's so great for people. That's the real stuff that I feel like I want from Housewives, but we're getting this instead. And so, yeah, I agree with that take. But the most interesting thing to me was how, so Mandy, I'm not sure if you saw my Instagram post after Real Housewives, if that's okay, if you haven't.
I haven't been on Instagram today.
Good for you, by the way. Good for you. So watching last night, my brain just is the most bizarre amalgamation of therapy and Housewives, and the way that it works. When I was watching Vicki, Tamra, and Shannon argue about Shannon's addiction, which was also ridiculous. I have a lot to say about that, but it reminded me of something, and I just want to share with everyone. It's called the Cartman drama triangle. So Mandy, I'm going to share with you what I posted and my thoughts about this, and you let me know what you think. So, wait, let me get my note. I'm sorry. So in 1960, this guy named Stephen Cartman identified this drama triangle where there's 3 roles, right, in a triad of a relationship. So the first role is the victim who feels oppressed and helpless. That's Shannon. The persecutor who blames and criticizes. That's Tamra. And the rescuer who tries to save the day without being asked, which is Vicki. And so for me, this episode played out like some sort of psychoanalytical telenovela. And I was just like, this is amazing. And so, but I really did want to explain to people about this drama triangle. And I did post about it on my Instagram, because it really does explain for people who were confused last night. I thought to myself, people who don't have an understanding of psychology were probably like, what's this about? So for me, my explanation is that they get themselves into these really unhealthy patterns and form this drama triangle. And I also believe it's the same thing that happened with Vicki, Brooks, and Tamra. So my point is that I think Tamra gets herself involved too much in these things, that while it's great TV, I was really disheartened last night to see how she treated Shannon, because here's the thing that I feel like, I want to hear your thoughts on this, but to me, that really shows her character, right? So you were friends with Shannon, you're not friends anymore, but like, if you ever loved her, I just feel like Tamra was like a villager with a torch, just like screaming through town square that Shannon's a drunk. And I'm like, where is this love that you supposedly had for her? Like, what is this about for you? So what's your take on all that?
I think that Tamra and Shannon had a very real relationship the first time when Tamra was on the show. And then when Tamra was fired, I do believe that Shannon ghosted her, because this seems to be a pattern that Shannon does. She's kind of ghosted Taylor Armstrong ever since. So I think when Tamra came back, she's like, oh, I'll make up with Shannon for the season, but I'm never going to trust her again. And so I don't think Tamra's approaching this as an actual friend. I think she's approaching this as what would be good for the show and what would make good reality TV. I don't think Tamra, I've ever seen her be a quote unquote good friend to anyone. I'm not sure she really understands what that's like. Or maybe it's because she was treated pretty harshly in her life and, with sort of very honest criticism that she says, okay, well, this is what love is, right? To just be honest, right? And I don't know. What's the Taylor Swift lyric where she says, so casually cruel in the name of being honest?
Yes.
And I don't think Tamra's casually cruel. I think she's overtly cruel. But I think it is for her in the name of being honest. And unfortunately, the way in which she tries to quote unquote help Shannon or draw attention to the problem that Shannon may have is like she may be making good points, but the way in which she's making them are all wrong, and it negates everything that she is saying and she's concerned about.
I mean, I fully agree. And I think to your point, and you have such interesting takes. This is one of the reasons I love having you on, is that to me, Tamra seems like someone who has this eye for an eye mentality. And I personally just don't believe in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think like
same.
Right. So we're the type of people that it's like, if you hurt us, we're not going to like take the next opportunity to blow you away. That's just not who we are as humans. And so I think what you're saying is and what I'm feeling is that Tamra is like, well, we were good friends, but you hurt me. And so I'm never going to forgive that. And any chance I get now, I'm going to take the same opportunity to do to you what you've done to me. And
interesting.
That I don't know. What do you think? That's kind of how I've been feeling about watching it all.
I don't even know if she's trying to hurt Shannon. I think she's trying to make a good show. And I think she is like, wow, I've been hiding things from everyone and enabling this woman. And then she went out and did something really terrible. And I'm done enabling her. And I'm going to be as harsh about it as possible. To like, it's almost like she's beating someone over the head with a pan. And it's like, we get it, right? Like you don't have to do what you're doing.
Right. Because, one of the things that I wrote here is that, we can't shame someone into getting sober.
Yes.
And, so as a former addictions therapist watching it, what I wrote is like two things can be true. Tamra is right about Vicki being an enabler. And in fact, I made a hilarious meme about it. If you, check it out on Your Bish Therapist, because Vicki is absolutely an enabler. However, Tamra's treatment of Shannon was so harsh and inappropriate. And again, like what I appreciated was Gina stepping in and being like, hey, if you're really concerned, this isn't the move. And, Gina's one of my favorite housewives just because to me, she's so real and like she's sober. And it's like, this is not the way to get your friend. Like Tamra's clearly more angry at Shannon than she is concerned about her health and well-being, in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is because of her like very disingenuous all of a sudden new alliance with Alexis, when I don't know that there were two people in the Bravoverse who hated each other more than Tamra and Alexis, for those who forget. And so I feel that Tamra is trying to make a good show. And I also think she has this anger and resentment towards Shannon and Vicki. And so I just feel it was like this psychoanalytical soup that led to just a really hard, uncomfortable scene to watch.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that I would be on Tamra's side in the beginning before the season aired because I'm like, oh, it is a bad look to go and do this show that's about drinking. And oh, Shannon is not really trying. She's going to some faith healer or something. Like I assumed she went to some sort of wellness clinic that has like no evidence-based medicine, therapy, anything. But it actually feels like she's doing work on herself, at least to me. Mm-hmm. And she's asking questions about why she's behaved a certain way, why she makes certain choices. I think that is really important. Even what she said in her confessional yesterday, where she talked about her childhood and there being drinking at home. And it was always thought of as fun and not a crutch and a way to deal with, harsh emotions. And it just makes me think that she's been doing some serious, like looking at herself. And I don't know, the term alcoholic is so charged. There's certain words that are just very charged in our society. And using them sometimes doesn't help any situation, right? Mm-hmm. And you can you can have a problematic relationship with alcohol without necessarily meeting the criteria for an alcoholic. And I don't know what the criteria are, but I always could tell you. I always think it's helpful to phrase things in, is alcohol contributing positively to your life, or is it contributing negatively more so than not? And I think that's the question that Gina asked herself. And she was like, I don't think I meet the criteria for being an alcoholic, but I'm going to try giving up alcohol and see what it does. And she's been sober, but she does not identify as an alcoholic. And she I don't think she's like working a program necessarily.
Correct. She's not.
So I think with Shannon, it's better to phrase it as like she's had some problematic relationships with alcohol for a very long time. But part of me is also like, okay, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, was it the bad relationships and then the alcohol? Was it the alcohol and then the bad relationships? I think it's really hard to untie them. And so when Tamra's like, you didn't go to rehab, you went to therapy to learn why you choose the wrong men. I'm like, actually, that is part of the problem.
Part of that, absolutely.
Like,
and
she chose a husband that was horrible to her. We all watched it unfold. And then she chose a partner who was much better than him, but was not like meeting her needs. And she was clearly unhappy and frazzled in that relationship, but yet she guarded it so much. And that was an unhealthy thing. Like, she literally couldn't break the relationship. Even though she got a DUI partly as a result of like being around him and being so upset in his presence that she left his house drunk in a car. It's something that she says she normally would never do. So I do think that there is a relationship between her drinking and the problematic men in her life. And I think she's taking some time to examine. She's not in another relationship right now. I think that's positive. Like, you've been in pretty bad relationships for a while. Maybe take a break, examine. And then when you start dating again, you can make better decisions.
Right. Because here's the thing that I know for 100% certain is that anyone, you know, I talk about addiction being a spectrum, right? And people so badly want to have a black and white definition, and that does not exist. And I 1,000% agree and support what you just said in terms of it's not about the term alcoholic. It's about what is your relationship with this substance, whatever it is, whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, whether it's, whatever it is. Why am I using this and how is it being used is the better question. And so for me, when Tamra goes on about, the alcoholism, it's like she's creating such a divisive situation that immediately Shannon's just not going to hear her, number one. Number two, I fully agree with you that I am seeing Shannon for the first time ever take accountability, ownership, and really work on making changes. Here's the thing. I never was a Shannon fan because of all this subversive stuff. I just have a super sense, like a spidey sense for that. And because of that, I just didn't care for her. But she has really earned my respect navigating this whole situation, in my opinion, with grace and dignity.
Yes. Number
one, because I'm a therapist, but I couldn't say that I'd be as calm as Shannon's being and restrain myself, But the other piece of it is that you're absolutely right. We need to look at when we use a substance, there is always some sort of codependency going on, whether it's in your romantic relationships, your friendships, your familial relationships. There is always codependency that has to be looked at. And in my opinion, when people come into a rehab, I worked in an inpatient rehab for a long time, there's as much of a love addiction and a relationship addiction as there is the substance, typically, especially for women. Because I think what Shannon is really trying to do is find love. However, we have to find that in us first and foremost. And so, to your point, when Tamra yelled and argued about, you're looking at your relationships with men, I got so angry. I'm like, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah,
that is exactly
that sounds
part
really
of the program.
Hard to do and also really smart.
Yeah, like good for you, Shannon. Yeah, you should look at this because you have a bad picker and you are a lovely person who deserves better. And we got to get you healthy and figuring out. Because to me, it sounds like the drinking is really intertwined with her relationships with men. And this is going to lead me to talk about the scene with Shannon and her dad, Gene the Machine.
So funny.
He was so cute. But here's the thing. The therapist in me, I was just like drooling because I'm like, So for those who didn't catch it, Shannon had lunch with her dad. They call him Gene the Machine for his ability to take in a great amount of alcohol. That is why he is called Gene the Machine. And this led Shannon to talk about, and by the way, open up in a way that I'm like, yes, Shannon, I want to see more of this. She opened up about what the alcohol kind of like, what the rule was for it. Because all families have different kind of like rules and mores, right? Around alcohol.
Oh my God. That's been a shocking thing to learn as an adult.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that there, and this is a good example of Shannon grew up in a family. Not only did Shannon grow up on boats, but she grew up in a family where drinking was really normalized and large amounts of drinking was normalized, number one. But number two, the therapist part of my brain says there is a significant genetic component to alcohol abuse and addiction. And so for me, watching her talk to her dad about alcohol and the way that he used it honestly kind of gives me this intuition or clinical feeling that there may be some genetic pieces here that we're missing. And what frustrates me is when people talk about addiction, they talk about it like it's a character defect. And it's like, so for example, if someone had crippling depression or anxiety and someone were to just say, well, just stop. Well, that's not how it works, right?
Yeah.
People need therapy. They need medication, things like that. And same thing with substances. No one grows up saying, I want to be an addict or an alcoholic or whatever. Nobody grows up saying that. So I just think it's good to have some more compassion, number one, and to outline, number two, that Shannon may be fighting a battle that she's missing a piece of, which is her genetics.
Yeah.
So, I just feel that whatever it is that she's doing, in my opinion, whatever gets people to that point where they're examining their behavior, great, right? I think the world would be better off if we all did that and, took accountability for stuff. So, but like you said, man, Gene, he was also so cute. I mean, I just love seeing that scene between the two of them. It was really sweet.
And I've noticed in families where there's a lot of drinking, there's usually like a person who is very like jolly and happy every time they have a glass of wine, doesn't ever seem to be in a particularly bad mood, doesn't seem to be necessarily abusing it. And so then the people around them drinking the same amount who maybe aren't in as good of a mood, who maybe use it for different reasons, excuse like how many glasses they're having because like, oh, well, my mom, she can polish off a bottle. Well, everyone's a little bit different with what they can handle and, how they use it and how often. And yeah, it's very interesting because I grew up in a family that didn't drink. And I didn't think that was weird. And it has nothing to do with addiction. It's just my dad grew up in the Soviet Union where alcohol was routinely abused, and he was forced to drink as in college actually to get like money from the government. Like it's actual, this is crazy. So he was a member, as everyone is, of the Young Communist League. And Komsomol, I think is what it was called. And you would get grades like by the Young Communist League in college about not just your actual grades in like education, but socializing. And he had a low grade for socializing, but he was like, I have friends. I hang out with my friends. And he was like, oh, it's because I'm not getting so drunk that like I'm vomiting or they're like, like, I don't know. It was drinking in excess was so not just normalized, it was celebrated. And he did that for like a semester to get his like score up in socializing. And then, and then you get like your score is associated with how much, I think, funding you get for, I don't know. It was so weird when he was explaining it because I was like, why don't you really drink? And he just like thinks it's kind of like he really doesn't like hard alcohol. He hates the taste of it.
Gee, I wonder why, because he was basically forced. Mandy, can we bring your dad on and talk about this? Because that is, I need to immediately know more about this. That is
I know.
wild.
I need to ask him more about it because the first time he explained it, I was like so confused. And his dad really liked to drink, but it was a celebratory thing. And it reminded him of World War II, which he fought in.
Sure.
And, whoever died, they would split the vodka ration. And it became this like vodka was like
trauma
a thing.
bond.
Yes. Yeah. And, my grandfather, my dad's dad, like lost his sister in the Holocaust. I mean, it was and his grandmother, it was a whole thing. So my dad just was like, yeah, I'm not really into it. But then when we get together with other people who are drinkers and who want wine, he wants to taste it. Maybe he'll have a glass. He had a grasshopper for the first time a couple of years ago. I posted a video of it. He loved it. He was like, this is the most amazing drink I've ever had in my life. It's ice cream. It's alcohol. It's like, I love this. Like, it was so funny. So, and then my stepmom, Joyce, when they first started dating, he said he didn't drink. And she was like, this is so horrible of me. But I thought either he's got a problem with it or he's boring. And the first time they went on a date, she ordered like dinner with a glass of wine. And he was like, I'll have exactly what she's having. And Joyce was like, oh, yeah, but without the wine. He's like, no, with the wine. And she was confused. He's not sober, but drinking was just not a big thing. And then my mom didn't like it. She didn't like the taste of it. She didn't like carbonation. She's a very picky lady. And then unfortunately, she developed liver disease, which is really ironic for someone who never abused any substances and was relatively quite healthy. It was autoimmune. And so she really couldn't drink, especially the last few years of her life. I mean, that could have killed her sooner. And she's passed. But it's just, it's so interesting to be around, like when we do family reunion, like we're all like, all my cousins were all like the kid that like drank a little bit in their 20s, but then kind of like quickly grew out of it. Like by a certain point. And so none of us really think about it. Like I remember I had one of my best friends who's from an Irish Catholic family join me for my family reunion. And she was like, do you guys have wine or like beer? And I was like, oh, maybe. I don't know. Like it literally didn't cross my mind that there would be alcohol. Like it's just not something we do when we all get together, except for when it's Shabbat and we have a little bit of wine, right? But
sure.
So it's just like every family's culture around it is so different. There are so many cultural and religious things around alcohol, especially wine. And so whatever is normal in your family is what you think is normal. And then, and it's not abnormal to go to a family reunion where people are drinking, right? Like that's not weird. But to me, it was. I was like, oh, why are you all doing that? Right. I don't know. It was, but so it's just, we all grew up differently around it. And I think relationships with alcohol, especially in our country where alcohol is legal, but most of the other substances are not, that people think that it's somehow not as dangerous or better, or I don't know. It's very, very interesting.
Here's my beef with alcohol is that it's the only drug that you get shamed for not using. And in your, societally speaking, because I don't drink, and I've shared on the show before, my dad was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic. I don't really speak to him. It's a whole thing. And I grew up knowing, being surrounded by alcohol being problematic. And so to your point, and at family gatherings and things like that, if there were not alcohol at my family gatherings, nobody would have attended.
This is like so common amongst my friends. Like everyone talks about it, right? Because someone eventually gets sober in the family, and then it's an issue. It's like, oh, can we have Thanksgiving without anyone drinking? Is that okay? This is the first year after rehab, and then some people don't want to show up. And it's that to me is indicative of an issue. It's like, oh, if you can't have one meal like without alcohol to be supportive of a family member who has been struggling, then like that's a you problem, right?
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. I cannot tell you. So I don't drink as a result because obviously I saw what it did growing up, number one. And number two, I just don't like it. Number three, I have a million health issues. Like you said, I have liver issues as well. And it's just would do nothing positive for me. But you would not believe how often people who know that I'm dealing with a chronic cancer and all these issues, and they're like, why don't you just have a drink? And I'm like, why don't you just understand that alcohol sucks? Now, listen, I'm
funny
teasing.
Story though about I think it was during COVID. It was like December 2020. I developed an eye twitch. Okay. And it was getting so bad. It was my left eye that would twitch, and it started twitching maybe like 10 to 15 times an hour. And it was really, but like other people couldn't tell it was twitching, but it really was impacting me. And the more I got nervous about it, the worse it got. And I was down in Florida visiting my dad and stepmom, and my stepmom finally is like, why don't I just take you to my eye doctor and she can examine you, and then you don't have to worry if they don't find anything, right? Then you can just, relax. And the doctor examined everything. We did like a bunch of tests, and then basically she said it was stress related, which made sense, right? It's like the middle of a pandemic. Everything sucked,
Yeah, our bodies tell us if we're not paying attention. Our bodies are like, knock, knock, bitch. I am.
I live in DC, and I was very nervous about the presidential transition. Proven rightly so. And it was like all around that time. But she looked at me and she goes, do you drink? And I was like, sometimes. And she goes, okay, have 2 glasses of wine and like calm the fuck down. Like basically it was like about the eye, and like my stepmom laughed and laughed and laughed, and she delivered it in such a funny way.
For sure.
And I was like, so that night we got a bottle of wine, had a couple glasses, and like it got better. It took months, right, to like slowly stop happening, but it was a stress response. And she was basically like, whatever you can do to lower your stress, breathing exercises, yoga, going on walks.
So she did add in that other stuff, right?
Yeah,
not just
but
drink.
She was like, she's like, if you're like wound up right now, just like have a glass of wine and calm the fuck down. Like it'll go away. She's like, there's nothing anatomically wrong with your eye. She's like, if people develop twitches that are like farther outside of their eye, you can do Botox for it. But she's like, I wouldn't recommend this. It's like too close to, and she goes, and honestly, it's not particularly visible. Like I can see it when I'm examining you. But it was just the first time. And my stepmom like still like laughs and just thinks this woman is the most hilarious person.
Well, I mean, that is hilarious, but also to my point, like a doctor literally prescribing a couple glasses of wine, that is so wild to me. Because, and here's the thing, I have an oncologist who's like, he's a really cool dude. And he's like, Melissa, sometimes you have to have a margarita. I'm like, listen, bro, that's fine, but not for me. You know what I mean? Like alcohol does nothing but increase inflammation. It increases, ironically, our body's, stress response to things. And so like, here's what Shannon said that I wanted to get to before we kind of moved on to other things. But, Shannon made a point of saying, it helps me forget certain things, but makes me feel sad and depressed. And so for some people, like you're saying, it can be a, social thing, but there are people in this world who just they cannot do that. And so what I wanted to say is that, alcohol is a depressant, and it can disrupt the balance of neurotransmitters in the brain, which neurotransmitters are like chemical messengers that regulate mood. They do a lot of other things too. Alcohol can interfere with the release of serotonin, norepinephrine, while also activating the brain's reward system and triggering dopamine release. So over time, drinking alcohol can increase the number of neurotransmitters in the brain, making it harder to avoid painful emotions like depression and anxiety. So then how addiction happens, it becomes this vicious cycle of getting sicker to avoid pain. And so, while that story is funny, and it is a good example of how, like, of course, you're going to use it responsibly and it's hilarious, and you're like, oh, this is a stress response. It's like, could you imagine if you had that genetic component for addiction, started drinking, and then just continually relied on it?
She did ask, do you drink? And I was like, sometimes. And she's like, okay. Because if I said no, then she would have been like, well, just do the yoga.
Right. Just do the other amazing stuff for your body. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, man.
My God.
That lady.
So, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I could write a book about the insane things that doctors have told me, good and bad. So maybe we could do a whole other episode on that because I love that story. So, the other thing before we moved on to, I wanted to touch on a couple other things before we move on because, Mandy and I, we are chatters and we can really, we get caught up. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on was that the Emily, Heather, and Gina and Katie thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is interesting. I actually have a strong opinion on it.
Oh, share it. Hit it.
I think Gina did the right thing. I think she was like, okay, Katie, you're telling me this information. I'm telling you, don't bring it up, right? Like you're telling me before we start filming, I'm telling you once filming start, like do not bring this up. I don't think she needed to tell Heather. Like if someone said something nasty about a friend of mine, I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to tell my friend, hey, I heard something not nice about you, right? And I think Katie should have not brought it up. I would like to get to know Katie as Katie. I don't want to know Katie as someone who's coming in with an agenda and a bunch of hurt feelings about a person she has no interactions with.
And the stupidest storyline I've ever heard, which is like, okay, we all know who Heather Dubrow is, right? And I've talked about this on other parts of the podcast. When you get to a certain level of wealth and status, it just changes your brain. It just does. Mm-hmm. Heather is not a humble person. She's just not. She is rich, honey, and good for her. But the problem is that, do you remember flashbacks of when Heather's mom would come on? Okay.
When they went to New York, her and Gina, and they had dinner with her mom, like it sounded like her mom would say things that would put her down and make her feel bad.
Constantly. And in my opinion, when I watch Heather, I believe that Heather, like we all are destined to repeat patterns if we don't properly address our wounds that, created those. And so I think Heather really lacks awareness into how passive aggressive, and condescending she can be.
Yeah.
And I think that, so what was the most fascinating thing for me, because I really love Emily. I think she is a voice of reason. And Emily said, with Heather, you need to walk on eggshells. And Gina didn't want to upset her. And Emily was talking about how she and Gina are real friends, so they can call each other on their BS. And she was like, Heather isn't like that. And it's like, well, of course. Heather isn't the type of friend who wants feedback. Like, in healthy relationships, like real friends, when people are doing things and messing up, you need to be like, hey, I love you. We got to look at this, right? You got to check your friend. And Heather just doesn't, she's just not like that. So I feel like Heather is really sneakily manipulative in ways that I can super identify, but I don't know if other people can. And so Heather says to Gina about Katie, right? She's showing her character, make your own decision, but it's something to know, right? And it's like, just tell her you don't want her to be friends with her and be honest and like stop this subversive, passive. It really did remind me a lot of Heather's mom.
So I think that Heather thinks she's breaking the pattern because she's not doing it with her kids. Right?
I fully agree.
And so, and in a way, she is breaking the pattern, right? She has what it seems is very wonderful, loving relationships, warm and nurturing with her 4 children. But with other people, she doesn't show the same level of like warmth or kindness or respect. I think for her, sometimes it has to be earned and it could be taken away. And then there's not like a baseline level of respect to give to everyone for her. Although I love her as a housewife. I met her and Terry at BravoCon. I was at the bar ordering a drink next to Terry, and we had a whole chat about transgender children and policy related to it. Yeah, it was really interesting. It was just
agree. I think they're wonderful people and wonderful parents. But so and listen, to your point, she is still breaking a cycle, but she's going to be a dick to her friends. Like, that's just how Heather's going to be. And to me, what I respect immensely about them is I really think they have a lot of love there and they're amazing parents. And I think Heather is a great housewife because she is really rich. She is really like aspirational. And with that is going to come some character, some characteristics that it's just, you know, the storyline of like Heather not being nice to newbies. It's like, yeah, no doy. Okay. Who cares? Like, move it along. This is not the way for you to ingratiate yourself into this group. So I agree, because I think I like Katie, but I don't like how she came in with this stupid storyline. Who cares if she didn't acknowledge you at a party? Who gives a hoot? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'd much rather hear about Katie being adopted by a white family.
Yes.
And like what that, and not acknowledging her Korean heritage.
Yeah.
All of that
and the
is
cultural implications of that.
Is so interesting. In her conversation with Jen that she brought up, that Jen said, hey, you know, I have a child that's not the same like race as me, and I'm wondering what I'm doing wrong in this. And that's a conversation I would love to watch. I also don't mind when they like fight and stuff. I think that's also interesting. I think that's why Tamra is making the show work. But sometimes it just seems so overt and like planned. It doesn't seem as organic. That
you mean she's basically acting like she's a soap opera actress? Yeah,
right. But I don't think Heather is acting. I think that's like her very real reaction to,
for sure.
So it's interesting to watch like how they are when their buttons get pushed.
Yes. And Heather, when her buttons get pushed, she fascinates me because she seems like I wrote that she seemed like quietly and politely enraged. You know, it was such like this dichotomy.
There's nothing scarier.
And I'm like, oh no, that's the person you got to be scared of. You know, not the, you know, outright, like whatever. The Heathers are the people you have to be scared of. The other thing, I guess, before I move on that I wanted to mention is that, okay, a couple things. Shannon had this language around alcohol that I just wanted to point out that I found really concerning. How she talked about DUI being like a quote unquote punishment. And she talked about how she quote unquote limits herself to 2 drinks. And so for me as a therapist, I just wanted to take a note that like the language that we use to discuss things is often sometimes we're not cognizant of it, and it often will tell us a lot about how someone's really feeling. And so it just says to me that she is seeing this as a punishment, and she's still like in maybe a little bit of victim mode. And if you're telling yourself that you have to limit yourself to 2 of something that just got you in trouble, it didn't make me feel really confident for her. But like, you know, she's going through it, so I get it. And when Alexis said to Vicki, welcome to my world now, I was like, girl, bye.
Oh, I thought it was funny. It was like the one funny thing that she's done in the last 5 episodes.
I mean, you're right. That is the one funny thing that she's done.
You're like poking the bear. Like nothing gets under Vicki's skin more than pointing out that like you're on the show that she started. And she's not
on it anymore.
Yeah,
and that is such a blow to her ego. I made this meme where, you know, how at the end, Vicki, of all people, the hypocrisy, where she's lecturing these women about being good, Christian, stand-up women. And then literally 10 minutes before that, she tells Alexis to sit down, bitch. And I quote. So I made this meme
so
that
funny.
Said like it said like it was like a picture of Vicki, and I had the closed captioning on, so you could see what she said, and I was like, Vicki 10 minutes before she lectures everyone about being kind, you know, and I'm like, that's so Vicki.
When Emily pointed out like that. And the whole thing is just so funny because she's like, well, you know, I know that you're a follower of Christ, of Jesus. And then you are. And then I'm like, and Heather's not.
Yeah. What about
she's like, we're all like, you know, like sisters in Christ.
It's like, slow your roll, also, Miss Vicki.
There is something that for whatever reason in the US, and I don't know about other countries, but here it's like, especially in politics, and I feel like this is kind of a good segue, but do you have to prove that you're a moral person? And one of the ways to do that is by saying you're a person of faith and talking about your religion. But the truth is that anyone can be moral, anyone can be kind. It doesn't matter if they follow a religion or don't follow a religion, but for some reason we have assigned in our head, oh, if you are a follower of Christ, or if you are, someone who's a person of faith, which is also a very sort of Christian way to talk about religion. I know Josh Shapiro in his speech, the governor of Pennsylvania, said, I'm proud of my faith. And I thought for a second that was sort of, I didn't realize it, but Jews do code switch. We, as a Jewish person, we don't talk about religion in that way. That's a way that we talk about it to people who aren't like us or who don't follow our belief system or are part of our culture. So it's just very interesting to see Vicki just say that. And I think it's a common belief, but I do think it's a misconception because
it's a huge misconception.
There are so many people who follow religion who are very unkind and very mean. And there's a lot of people who don't follow any religion and are very kind and follow all of the quote unquote teachings of Jesus, of loving your neighbor, of, helping the unhoused. And yeah.
In fact, here's the thing. And so to your point, because I discussed this, there's a second episode airing in addition to this one in which I literally said, people should be free to practice whatever they want or don't practice. And so growing up Catholic, I did grow up Catholic, and what really bothered me, because I'm not a practicing Catholic now because of everything that happened with the Catholic Church. And for me, I really struggle with the disingenuous behavior of saying I'm a Christian, I'm better than people, I'm moral, but then behaving so absurdly inappropriate, hateful. That to me really gave me a hard time with my religion in particular, seeing people in church that I know had just engaged in domestic violence or, whatever it may be. And so for me, it's not about being a Christian or how you identify. It's are you a good human? Are you a good citizen? How do you treat others? And so I think this is a beautiful transition to start talking a little bit about the next part of our topic, which, I just wanted to say that I thought about, what I wanted the season 3 premiere episode to be. And having this platform, I feel a sense of responsibility just for, the greater good, right? And to use it for the greater good as often as I can, in between silly housewives drama. It's never been my intention to discuss politics, but what we are experiencing currently, in my opinion, transcends politics. Watching the attack on basic human rights, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQIA+ rights, rights for people to practice other religions without discrimination, right? It has me feeling terrified in ways I've never felt before. So I'll be honest, I've been feeling scared and helpless, angry, lots of emotions about this. So, this discussion that we're going to have, it's not to be divisive. It's born of a desire to inform and really advocate for others because, Mandy, you and I both in different ways, we're all about advocacy, right? For human rights. So can you talk a little bit about the upcoming election cycle? Speaking of all of this, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you for also giving me the platform on your platform to talk about things that matter to me. I love politics. I always have. And the reason I think, and it's, it's not amazing all the time, right? It's gotten pretty nasty in more recent years, but the late Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota, who I volunteered on his campaign, he always said politics is about the improvement of people's lives. It's not supposed to be about anything else. So when you say you don't want to get involved, I understand what people mean with the nastiness of elections and who's in charge and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to policies and making improvements, a lot of them happen via changes to laws. Not everything, right? But changes to laws can change people's behavior, can all of that. The other thing I will say is that I like to get away from the idea that there are good people and that there are bad people. I think people are really complicated. That includes politicians, that includes voters, that includes all of us. And so just because someone votes for Donald Trump, I don't think they're a bad person. And just because someone votes for Kamala Harris or other, more liberal politicians, that doesn't make them bad or good, right?
Preach.
It is. And when you said shame, and, when talking about alcohol use, shame has never made someone quit drinking. I don't think shame has ever been used positively in voting either. And what I think both sides like to do is shame the other side, but that doesn't change people's hearts and minds, right? And so I would like to ask everyone to maybe take some space from politics in the media, but more think about this election and every election as an opportunity to improve your community, right? I think the most decisive things in elections often are local. So who's on your city council, school boards really matter, state legislatures make so many decisions. We learned that after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, when it was up to the states to decide about women's access to reproductive health care. So, a lot of things are local, and to not overlook those local decisions and not spend time researching about who are the judges that are running, who are the prosecutors that are running, district attorneys, all of that really matters. And so I think there's usually not enough emphasis on that. When we talk about voting, people only think about it as the president or who you're voting for Senate, things like that. And while we have seen some pretty big changes happen at the national level, most change occurs at the local level. And so if you're interested in making change, if you don't like who's currently on your city council, if you don't like who's on your HOA, right, you can run, or you can encourage others to run that you think would better represent your interests or the interests of the community. And so that's what I really would like people to take away, is that this is an opportunity to make improvements. I view the American kind of dream as something that we are still working to attain. And that's a lot of how Kamala Harris talks about it. But it's if she's almost like reclaiming patriotism, like you can love your country and you can think that there's still room for improvement. And so
1,000%.
That's how I view things. Anyways, there's a whole lot. But also I was talking to you yesterday about how, I grew up with a very, very patriotic father who was a refugee from the Soviet Union and who came here, and for whom everything ever since getting here has been amazing, because he spent 26 years living under a regime that oppressed most people, but especially ethnic minorities like he was. Right. And to be able to participate in your democracy, which he didn't get to do until after he became a naturalized citizen, which was actually after I was born. And so he didn't get to vote for his favorite president, who was Ronald Reagan, because he got to the United States and he saw Ronald Reagan shaming Gorbachev and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and pointing out all of the lies that he had been told as a child and growing up, and all of the real horror that he felt communism was and that the Soviet Union was. You had this man talking about it, and then the shining city on a hill, and he was so optimistic in how he spoke. And my dad was like, I never got to vote for him, and I loved that man because he talked about this country in such a positive way. Right. And and he's like, for all of the bad things that this country has done, it took me in. Right? It took me in. Yeah. And it took other people like me in. And it continues to take people like me. And it takes in the Afghan interpreters that worked during the war. It takes in Iraqi refugees. There is a whole lot more that we could be doing. But, for people who didn't ever have the chance to make decisions about their destiny, it's really amazing to live in a country where you can vote, right, which is part of it, decision making, where you can choose what profession you want, where you can choose where to go to school. He didn't have choices. And so for him, the opportunity is the key thing. And it just reminds you that, okay, maybe it's not so bad here, right? I think a lot of people get hung up on problems, right? And there are so many problems. I will not pretend that there are not problems with this country, or with how we have policy, or with how things work, any of that. But there's always the opportunity to make it better. And
right.
I think,
I
that's
just
what the
want to
focus
say,
should be on.
I think you have such a unique perspective, and I love when you share about this because of your dad, because of what he experienced under communism, and now again hearing about that alcohol stuff. Oh my gosh, I'm like, this poor man. So you're right, and this is why I think my listeners love you when you come on, because everything is so scary and divisive. And so when you talk about it, I swear it's like drinking a glass of warm milk. I'm like, okay, it's going to be okay, everyone. Mandy's here to help us understand that, there are some things that we take for granted that we still have. So if we could transition into talking about, right, because that's a great transition to, yes, there are some still amazing things about this country, but there are some, I guess, people, would you see it as a threat or a Project 2025? There's a lot of things in that I think are really scary. So could you talk about that piece of it a little bit?
I'm going to get my notes out. So, Project 2025 is something that I think people have heard a lot about recently. Some have taken the time to kind of learn more, but I encourage you to kind of look through the document. It's available for download on the Heritage Foundation website. And it is a political initiative that's published by the Heritage Foundation that was written by a number of Donald Trump associates that aims to, what they say is, promote conservative and right-wing policies, that some of them are, and but more so to reshape the U.S. federal government by consolidating executive power. And one could argue, I would, that the document is kind of trying to change what the founding fathers intended this country to be, with the separation of powers. People get very frustrated, often rightly so, at presidents. Why aren't you, doing this? Why aren't you canceling all debt? Why aren't you your president? Well, the president isn't the king. Mm-hmm. And things have to be approved by Congress often. And we have a court system which will check the powers of the presidency.
Right. The checks and balances are incredibly important. And what you're saying is that this is trying to change that fundamentally.
Yes. So the project uses this theory called the unitary executive theory, which maintains that the executive branch is under the direct control of the president. Now, it theoretically is in some ways. So the president has a cabinet, and the cabinet is made up of secretaries that are in charge of different agencies and departments: the Department of Defense, the Department of Labor, Department of State, all of that, Department of Homeland Security. But the people who work at those agencies are primarily civil servants who are there regardless of who is in office. Right. I interned at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon between 2005 and 2006 during the Iraq War in the Office of Military and Family and Communities. And those people were around when it was Clinton, and they were around for Bush, and then they stayed during Obama, and then they're there for Trump. It's like a continuous sort of thing. And I think it's what some call the deep state, where they worry that these people tend to lean a certain way politically. It's much more of, these people know the programming, they know the details of the agency. So the people working at the Pentagon know the military really well. They know it like the back of their hand. The people who are working at the EPA are experts in certain areas of the environment, in terms of water experts and experts in all different kinds of, chemicals and things like that. And that these people are often just nonpartisan. The kind of things that they are trying to do have nothing to do with necessarily partisan politics, but just, identifying,
trying to make the world better, identify problems.
Yeah, things like that. And so right now there's approximately 2.25 million civil servants working for the federal government. And a lot of people would say that that is too many. right? And I understand that. I hear that. That may be a very real thing. But, this includes postal workers, right? It includes people who work at national parks. It includes all the lawyers at the Department of Justice, people who work at U.S. embassies around the world. And there are only about 4,000 political appointees. And so when an administration changes, the political appointees change. They can change during an administration. Let's say someone is like, I'm going to step down in my role as the administrator of USAID because I need to spend more time with my family. And I've spent 3 years away from them, basically. And so then they may change. But it always changes between administrations. And so with this election, the administration is going to change regardless. It's not going to be a Biden administration anymore. It's going to be either a Trump administration or a Harris administration. And they're going to bring these people along, and the political appointees, they're going to decide, who gets what positions. Sometimes they're chosen for really good reasons. Sometimes not so great reasons, but they're put in these positions usually because they have some sort of expertise or could be really good at their job. So An example that I like to use is Pete Buttigieg, because I think he's very good at his job.
I love Pete Buttigieg. I love him so much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I cannot even.
It's hard to...
How could anyone not
How
like
could
that
you
man?
say he's not good at his job? You can dislike his politics and his views, but he is arguably doing quite a good job managing the Department of Transportation, the bridge collapse that happened in Maryland. There's so many things, going on. All the flights that were canceled due to that computer glitch that happened and making sure people are able to actually get their money back from airlines. So that's an example of a political appointee. What Project 2025 wants to do is it wants to reclassify a large percentage of the civil servants as political appointees, meaning that they're there to serve the president and they're not really there necessarily to serve their country, if that makes sense. Not that people don't serve their country when they're a political appointee. They do, but
of course
they will leave when that administration is no longer in office. And so, I, for one, think it's really just not a great idea to do this for so many reasons, right? Because we want a strong civil service. We want there to be continuity between administrations where that things still get done, even though, it's a different, head of state. But also because it takes so long to get the appointees through. We waited over a year and a half to have a decision from President Biden on a specific leader at USAID that I work with very closely in my job. And to wait for that announcement, they are in an acting position for a while. But when you're an acting administrator, you're an acting director, you're an acting whatever, you don't get the same ability to do things, to make decisions, to decide things on funding.
To use your expertise in the way that it needs to be used. You become a pawn in a little bit, maybe that's the wrong word, but you become a vehicle for the president at that point, rather than an important part of the machine in terms of because I think psychologically speaking, that's such an important point, which is we can't think that we have more knowledge than we do. And we all need people, right, who have these different niche levels of knowledge and expertise in things. I just think that there's personally to say that you should be in charge of everything or everything is just wrong and just incorrect and concerning.
And what I would say is that, there's a very, I think, good argument to be made about sort of the bloating of the federal government. And there's a lot of people that want to trim the fat, and that's a more conservative argument. But I would argue that Project 2025 is not interested in trimming the fat. It's interested in recreating the government for its own ideas and ideals, and wants to impose those ideas on everyone else rather than actually taking a conservative approach, which is why I think many people who are conservative sometimes have difficulty with the Trump, presidency, with the Trump campaign, because he's not actually a quote unquote true conservative. He is kind of changed the trajectory of what conservatism really means. And he's much more of like a populist. It's just a very different sort of a thing.
Okay.
So yeah, I understand that people think there's too many employees in the federal government. I hear that regularly from anytime I travel outside of DC. But, you know, that it's also like the people that are closest to me are these civil servants, and some are political appointees as well. So, you know, our main industry in Washington, D.C. is the federal government. Just like when you go to L.A., it's the entertainment industry, and you go to New York, it's the finance industry. You know, there's always some, you know, in certain places, it's the Navy and the military. Like San Diego is like a big military town. So there's always like some big, like, driver of the economy in each city. And so ours tends to be the federal government. And then some of the dangers, you know, I would actually just recommend people go look it up. You know, they're want to remove legal protections against discrimination, like employer discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, so that like an employer could fire you or could not hire you because you are a gay man, or anyone else.
Why would we want that?
So because they are trying to promote a certain idea of conservative Christianity that they want the rest of the country to follow. It's not just what they follow. It's you know, and so that's also it's just so interesting. So something to say about this Project 2025 is that it got the attention of a lot of people. And Trump was unhappy about that because it sounds as though it's these Trump associates coming up with what Trump is going to do should he regain office. And he thought it made it look like he wasn't the one at the wheel, which is true. And he was quite upset. And last week, the head of Project 2025 was essentially fired. So,
dang.
Yeah, it's definitely, there is a lot going on. All of that.
Yeah.
I will also say that I am from Minnesota originally. And so there is a Minnesotan on the one of the tickets. Quite excited about that because we turn out VPs. I think, out of the last 12 administrations, like this, like 3 would be VPs for Minnesota if this ends up being, if it's Harris Walz win. So that's exciting.
Minnesota really cranks them out, don't they?
We really we like to be the Robin to everyone else's Batman.
Yeah. Aren't they always?
So,
or Minnesotans. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just would really encourage listeners to, you know, step away from all the media and all the social media and all the kind of noise around election season and just kind of spend some time figuring out, okay, who's going to be on the ballot, where you vote, what initiatives are going to be on the ballot. You know, in Florida, there is an initiative on their issue on the ballot related to abortion that is 100% separate for who you vote for. So you could theoretically vote for Ron DeSantis, like I think my stepmom will in Florida, and also vote pro-abortion, which I think she will as well. Because because the issue is separate. You know, it's like if you initiative to legalize marijuana, right? You could vote for a candidate who's not for that, but you could also vote in favor of legalization and it could pass. Because a lot of people don't fall neatly into buckets.
Right. And Mandy, I want to thank you for just that main perspective here, right? Is that what can take away some of this anger and frustration and divisiveness is that people are complex. You're right. It's not black and white. We can't put, you know, this person is this party, so they're bad. This person is this party, so we're good. And so I think I just want to take a moment to thank you and appreciate that perspective because psychologically speaking, you're right. You know, we do live in black and white. And I think when we hear things about women's reproductive rights being removed, right, it's very visceral. It feels like, oh my God, the world is on fire. But what you're saying is that, you know, check out this document. If you're concerned about Project 2025, check out this document and make your best decisions, number one. But number two, what you're saying, which gives a lot of hope to people, is talking about how to affect change at lower levels, right? How to get involved in ways that, you know, because like you said, until you mentioned this, I never even thought of it, is that stuff going on in DC, that's doesn't always affect us the way that smaller local stuff does. And so I just am so grateful for your perspective on that. So just to remind people, like, are there any concrete things that people can do? I mean, you mentioned so much, but like to just summarize some bullet points of some concrete things people can do to get involved, to affect change at smaller levels.
Yeah, I would definitely look up, what does the ballot look like in your local election? Who's on it? Is there anyone that you're really excited about that you want to get involved in their campaign? Is there a city councilman that is championing an issue that really matters to you? Bike lanes or whatever. There's so many local, there's so many local issues. And, you can volunteer on the campaign. You can donate money to the campaign. You can do all kinds of things. But I really think the thing that is sort of the most important is just know who is on the ballot and know what their positions are and see which ones align with yours. And, like I say, like people don't fall neatly into buckets. My stepmom is very pro-LGBT, very pro-reproductive rights, but she also likes how the governor of Florida has handled the last couple hurricanes that have directly affected them and how quickly the government mobilized. And, and that hasn't always been the case in Florida. And so it's like, well, if he's doing this job good, and she's completely doesn't really watch a lot of news. I was trying to explain to her that don't say gay, Bill. And she's like, what's that?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So, but most people just like, why pay attention, right? Like there's so many other things going on in your own life. You don't have to, right? It's usually not good for you to pay too much attention, but know when it matters, right? Who is running for what offices? What are their positions for judges? What do they think about different types of response to crime, to all kinds of stuff? How do they feel about criminal justice reform? How do they, and, if a crime gets too bad and a city may decide to change who the prosecutor is, right? And that happened in San Francisco recently, where it's like, no, actually, we need to enforce laws, and so there's different ways to, but I would say that most people don't fall into neat buckets. And, I have a whole lot I would like to actually say at maybe a different episode about advocacy and actually like inside advocacy versus outside advocacy, because I think most people are only familiar with like protesting and outside advocacy, which is a really great way to be involved. But there's also opportunities to engage from the inside. Once you knock at the door and it's opened, go through, and what to do once you go through. So that's...
Well, folks, I think we're going to need to have a part 2 on this convo. No, because seriously, for me having this platform, I am such, I'm all about advocacy. And so for me, having people hear what we're saying, but also advocating for those people, as a woman, I am appalled by what is being proposed. And so I think that part 2 advocacy part, I think we could do a whole other episode on that. So for everyone listening to this, if you're interested in that, let us know. Let us know in the comments. Of course, Mandy, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being you. You're so smart. You're so knowledgeable. You have such a way of talking about these things that makes it feel less scary and, all that. So I couldn't imagine having anyone else here today for the season 3 premiere. Please plug, promote. Where can people find you? Let us know.
So you can listen to me on my podcast, Is This Real Life, which is mainly focused on the Real Housewives, but also some of the shows like Southern Charm, Summer House, Vanderpump Rules, all of that.
And it's great, by the way. For people who haven't listened, it's great. You should check it out for sure.
I love the Housewives. I have so much fun watching the Housewives, and I love talking about the Housewives with anyone, whether you agree with my ideas or don't. Like, it's so fun to just chat. And you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Mandy Slutsker. So I've stayed away from Twitter for a while, but started coming back because of the political stuff. And it's interesting.
It is. I had to get off. I had to pull the ripcord. I had to go.
100% support that.
wasn't working. So so for me, you can find me on Instagram at Your Bish Therapist. I also have a Spreaker supporters club that I've started for people to join to get extra episodes. Sometimes I do a little bit more personal because this listenership is really growing, which I'm so grateful. Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed the season 3 premiere. I have so many great more episodes for you. And Mandy, you'll definitely be back, correct?
Oh,
You'll be back, right?
Of course. Anytime.
Okay. So don't worry, guys. She'll be back. So for now, I'm just going to thank everybody for listening and, grateful for you all. And as I always say to end a show, please remember to take care of yourselves and each other. I'm just going to read my disclaimer quick. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and my posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT Podcast and on social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT Podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.